Our speaker, and without any further ado, I will do so. Our speaker today, as you know, is John Devlin from Cedrid, and just to give you a little bit of his background, very interesting, like me, started in philosophy with nice roots. I switched to sociology at a point.
That was your mistake.
Jobs started becoming an issue in terms of my interest in philosophy. BA in philosophy, and then went on to do 2 MAs, one in philosophy at the University of Calgary and one in public administration at Carleton University, and finished with a PhD here at the University of Guelph in rural studies. John is well-traveled and certainly has visited many parts of the planet and done work, including work in Honduras, Bolivia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Egypt, Mozambique, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Ukraine. He brings all of that experience to his current position now as a member of the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development, where he teaches rural planning and development theory, rural development administration, project development, and environment and development. His roots in doing development work go back to 1979, where he worked for a couple of years as a CUSO volunteer in Mozambique. He's also served as Assistant Director of the Center for Development Projects at Dalhousie University from 1984 to 1986. And from 1997 to 2000 was Assistant Director of the Environmental Capacity Enhancement Project, $4.5 million CETA-funded project delivered by Cedrid in 13 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. So for a number of years in the early 2000s, he was an assistant professor in international development studies at St. Mary's University in Halifax, which he tells me is his home playground. And he returned to Cedrid in 2006. So John, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today, and I look forward to your talk.
Thanks, Gary. I'm using this discussion as a bit of a teaching moment rather than a reporting moment, so there will be questions at the end. And we have a variety of technical glitches which we've been struggling with. One of which is that my fancy advancer, so that I can walk around the room as I like to do, doesn't work. The batteries are dead. So I'm going to have to continually gravitate around the computer. So I apologize for that. I won't be moving as much as I might. If you cannot hear me, please indicate. I will try to project, but sometimes I'll get preoccupied and I'll start to mumble. So if I start to mumble, please warn me. So what I want to do today is talk about some dilemmas of participatory evaluation. I think we're all proponents of participation in all aspects of development, but it's not an easy thing to do. And I think this is a nice example that brings out some of the difficulties that we find when we try to be very participatory. This is a project which I'll tell you a few more details about in a moment. But it was doing beekeeping training in Vietnam. The director of the project was Gard Otis, who's here with us and will be able to answer some of your questions specifically about the project. I became involved with Nonita Yap as the external evaluation team, which evaluated the project really in the winter semester in February through April, May of this year. So my involvement with the project is with the evaluation, not with running the project. So it is the evaluation that I'm going to speak about, and I hope that we will have some discussion in the question and answer period about evaluation. So the first thing, there's going to be 3 parts to this discussion. The first part will address what is participatory evaluation, and in some ways that's the teaching moment. So I'll talk to you about what evaluation is. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the project, just enough so that you can appreciate some of the details of the evaluation as we organized it and conducted it. And then finally, after I've told you a bit about what we did, I hope you will start to tell me whether we did well or not in terms of trying to be participatory in this project. Now, we all do evaluation all the time. So I just threw up a few words here that should ring some bells. If we say that something is interesting, or something is entertaining, or that something is exciting, we're evaluating. If we say that something is boring, we're evaluating. If we say that it's a bargain, it's expensive, it's a rip-off, we're evaluating. It could be funny, could be scary, could be surprising, could be predictable, we're evaluating. Some things are difficult, some things are easy, some things are delicious, some things are bland, some things are frustrating, some things are captivating. Some things are subtle, some things are crude. Those are all judgments we make all the time, and all those are evaluative judgments. So it's very natural for us to evaluate. But obviously in development, when we're evaluating development projects or development programs, we're working with a very specific kind of evaluation, or maybe a range of evaluations, and that's what I want to tell you about now. Part of what I've done throughout the text...
Why did I just go out? Oh, you did that?
I faded that.
When he goes like this.
Guard's worried. As soon as he sees a beehive, he starts to get concerned. So what I've done, just so you start to get a feel for the project and some of the context, I've just got those graphics in there. They fade and I move on through the text. A little bit later, I'll tell you a bit more about the project, so I will speak to some of those pictures. So that was a picture of a beehive. One of the beehives that in Vietnam are very, very common as a result of this project. So there are, I would suggest, two different approaches to doing evaluation. The first, much more common and standard kind of evaluation, I will call an accountability evaluation or an accountability approach. Some people speak to it as an auditing approach. You have a sense of what auditing is in financial affairs. There's a very similar structure to doing auditing type evaluations, where accountability is the main thing that we're concerned about. The other kind is participatory, we'll come to that in a moment. So with an accountability evaluation, we have a project, we have a project or a program, and the main thing we ask about it is whether or not it was effective. In other words, did it deliver the things that the original plan said would be delivered? And once we've made some judgment about whether or not it's been effective, we can also make judgments about its efficiency. What's the difference between the two? This is important and quite foundational. When we talk about effectiveness, were the outputs delivered? Did we do what we said we would do? When we talk about efficiency, it's a question of what is the cost per unit that was delivered. That sounds technical. That's as technical as it's going to get. So when we do accountability audits or accountability evaluations, effectively we're looking at effectiveness and efficiency. And this has dominated evaluation work probably since the 1920s or the 1930s. Effectiveness is very easy to evaluate when the things that we're looking for are easy to count. So if we're building schools, running training courses, irrigating acres of land, trying to produce tons of agricultural crops, running examination programs, or trying to build organizations or work with organizations, those things are all easy to count. And as a result, it's also easy to assess the efficiency of the project because we can ask questions about the amount of money we spent in order to get the output that we produced. So accountability evaluations tend to be relatively simple to perform.
I'm not saying that.
Yes. But the accountability approach has evolved through time and become a little bit more complicated. So effectiveness and efficiency are still primarily the focus of concern. But things have tended to move from looking at outputs and activities to starting to think about things like outcomes and impacts. We still look at activities and outputs, but now what's been added are these slightly more nebulous things, outcomes and impacts. And outcomes and impacts are more the results or the consequences of what we've done in the project in terms of producing our outputs and activities. What has been the consequence of that? Where does that come from? Why do we do that kind of evaluation more now? It really began with public auditors, like the Auditor General in Canada, who started to talk about values-based auditing, the notion being that it wasn't sufficient just to ask what the government had spent its money on, but also what was the value of the services that the government was producing. So public auditors started to move into value audits. And along with this, kind of running in parallel, there began in the business sector notions of results-based management, where again, it wasn't just the product you were producing, but questions about how satisfied the customer was and so on, reaching out beyond the countables to things that were a little more qualitative and nebulous. So you've probably heard, let's show of hands, who's heard about results-based management? Okay, so you've all heard results-based management. That's kind of where we are today with accountability evaluation. Now, it's a little bit harder to measure outcomes and impacts because they're more qualitative. So for example, we may know that we've done an education program, we've taught a bunch of students, or we've built a bunch of schools. But it's harder to evaluate whether the quality of education has improved. It's a more difficult thing. We can train a person, but it's harder to tell whether their capacity has increased. Or if their agricultural knowledge is improved. Or whether their employability has been improved over the long term. Or if the capacity of the community has increased. All of these things are very logical for us to think about, but actually they're quite hard to measure. One reason being that what is the time frame? If I'm going to produce a school, I know I can build it in 2 years. If I'm going to increase a person's capacity, I don't know how long it might take. And I don't know when it might manifest itself. It may manifest itself only 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. So time becomes a problem as we get into these outcome and impact type evaluations. Those difficulties have led to a lot of heated debate between those that run projects and those that evaluate projects and donors who give money for projects, because trying to figure out how to evaluate, how to quantify or measure some of these more nebulous things is quite anxiety-inducing. And I've been on both sides of that relationship. I can tell you sometimes it's hard to figure these things out. But it's not impossible, and results-based evaluation is what we do now most of the time. So this is still accountability evaluation, now trying to think about results rather than just activities and outputs. These are some of the beekeepers. You can see some of the people that were trained by the project. But as accountability evaluation has continued and as more people have become involved, and especially as NGOs have become more involved in the process, delivering projects and then having to be evaluated, there has been some evolution in the criteria that even accountability evaluations use. So we still have effectiveness and efficiency. But other questions that now tend to be asked are the relevance of the project. In other words, did the participants, the recipients of this project, was it something they actually wanted? Did their interest in it maintain over the 4 or 5 years that it was delivered? So that's something we can evaluate because we can ask them about that afterwards. The sustainability of the project. Obviously, after the Brundtland Commission in 85, 86, and the notion of sustainable development, sustainability has become a key concept. And sustainability both in terms of environmental sustainability but also in terms of the economic viability, sustainability of the project, and the social sustainability. In other words, when we do an accountability evaluation of a project, we ask, are the results of this project going to last? Yeah, it's here now, but what about 5 years from now? We have to think about that and make some assessment of that as part of being accountable. And then many people are interested in the replication. If we do a project in one place, what do we learn that maybe we could use in other places? So replicability has also become a criteria. And these introduce somewhat more qualitative elements to the evaluation process. They're qualitative, but they are still part of the accountability model. Okay, so the accountability model is getting more complicated. It's starting to grow and morph, but essentially we're still trying to report on what the project has generated. Now, when we set up an accountability evaluation, how does it work? What goes on? What are the steps? Well, there will be a donor who's funded the project, and they will be working with the implementing organization, whoever is actually delivering the project. And the time will come when they say, well, it's time to evaluate. And when they decide that the evaluation is necessary, they will select some team or company to be the lead evaluator. In most instances, the lead evaluator is going to come probably from the country of the donor, or maybe they might be hired and there'll be an international bidding process. But the lead evaluator will be someone who has a long experience and a track record in doing evaluations. But the evaluator does have to work in the specific context of the country where the project is being delivered. In our case, Vietnam, but any country. And so it's almost always necessary for the lead evaluator to go out and select, to find people to work with in that country who can provide logistical support, who can provide maybe translation, and a whole series of other things that it's very difficult for the lead to do from somewhere in another country. So usually an evaluation team involves the lead evaluation group and then the local evaluation group who work together as a team. And they're going to go and collect data from all of the project stakeholders. So this will be the staff of the project, the partners, the clients, maybe even the donor, the implementing organization, which is the project staff. The evaluators are going to go out and collect that data, they're going to analyze that data, and eventually they're going to report back to the donor and the implementing organization. Go back a second. I forgot my steps. The collection of data from the stakeholders takes place with an accountability evaluation in a way which puts a very sharp line between the evaluation team and the project, those that have delivered the project. So I've tried to depict this with these yellow bars. So in effect, once the evaluation team is selected, they are supposed to act very independently of the project deliverer. They're supposed to evaluate like a third party, just like an auditor. If you've ever been audited, the audit team comes in, they basically say, okay, go away, give us the files, we'll tell you in a week or a month, how you're doing. There is very little interaction between the evaluators and this group in terms of deciding what should be done, how it should be done, and so on. Basically, the evaluators are in charge. They decide what data is going to be collected, how it's going to be collected, and then eventually they will. So what goes on when we design one of these evaluations? What are the steps? Well, there's a number of questions we have to decide. And initially, those questions will be decided in a negotiation between the donor, the implementing organization, and the evaluation team as part of setting up the contract, deciding what exactly, how the evaluation is going to be organized. And these things include, what will the criteria of the evaluation be? What data will be collected? how or who will we collect the data from? Who is going to be the source of the data that's going to be collected? How will it be collected? How will it be analyzed? And who will receive the report? So if you look down that list, all of you should recognize basically a research design. An evaluation is simply a research job. Kind of decide what you need to know, where you can get that information, how you're going to analyze it, who you're going to report it. So in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, relevance, sustainability, and applicability, all of those things are going to be answered by going through and making decisions about these questions, answering these questions. So that was accountability evaluation. Very quick introduction. Now participatory evaluation. Participatory evaluation comes along, say during the 90s it started to gain momentum. It's gained much more momentum during the last decade. This comes from the OEC Development Assistance Committee, thank you. So the OECD defines a participatory evaluation as an approach in which representatives of the donors, the executing agencies, that's the implementing organization as I call it, the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, work together in designing, carrying out, and interpreting the evaluation. So all of the things that I just listed in a participatory evaluation, everybody that's involved in the project is supposed to be involved in the design process and in the delivery of the evaluation. So that's actually quite a demanding set of ideas when you start to think about it. So let's go through and make a list of the questions that are kind of thrown up when we try to move towards a participatory evaluation. Who is going to do the design? It's not obvious that it's going to be the evaluation team. It's not even obvious that there is going to be an evaluation team in the participatory evaluation. Who chooses the criteria? Who chooses the data that's going to be collected? Who chooses who's going to provide that data? How it will be collected? Who will do the collecting? How it will be analyzed? Who will write the report? Who will receive the report? All of these questions are kind of thrown up in the air with the participatory evaluation. All of this is sort of part of the discussion. And if you think about all of the actors that might be involved in a project, this could end up being a lot of people. This could be a very complicated thing. And that's kind of why I think there are dilemmas with participatory evaluation. Because the idea makes great sense, but the execution is problematic. So in principle, all of the stakeholders should be involved, which could be a lot of people. But do all of the stakeholders have the capacity? Do they have the interest? Do they have the time and the energy, the motivation to be involved in the evaluation? Remember, people have engagements with projects at a whole range of intensities. Not everybody is spending all their time thinking about the project. So it could be that there's lots of stakeholders in a project who are only kind of marginally interested in the project and really wouldn't be that interested in being involved in the process. And most importantly, are all the stakeholders involved in the same evaluation outcomes? Which is really another way of asking about the criteria that might be important to people. Well, this is far from clear, so we have to see. So with accountability evaluations, effectiveness, efficiency and effectiveness, I've suggested is the core, and donors are actually the ones most interested in accountability evaluations. They're the ones who want to know if their money was spent well, effectively and efficiently. But once participatory evaluations came along and more people started to get in on the discussion about what an evaluation should be like, things started to change. And increasingly, those who are interested in participatory evaluation said, you know what, we don't care that much about accountability. What we're interested in is learning from our experience. What do we know now that we didn't know before? The donor, yeah, they might have got their money's worth or not. That's not so important to us. What we want to know is what we know now, what we can do better, how we can get more developed as a result of the experience that we've gone through with this project. So this concern with social learning is something that the implementing organizations are interested in, the participants are interested in, donors to some extent, but not overwhelmingly. They're still mostly up in the accountability world. But as more implementing organizations turned out to be NGOs, they became much more interested in this social learning approach. But the social learning approach and all the people that might be involved creates some tensions, which I'm calling the dilemmas. And these are dilemmas which arise from the diverse foundations of knowledge that different people have who might have been involved with the project. Some people understand evaluation structures, some people understand research methodology, and a whole series of other elements of knowledge. Not everyone has those things. So what is the appropriate place for people to come in and be involved with an evaluation? Everyone has limited time, whether you're a senior person in the project delivery staff or you're a recipient of some aspect of the thing, you're busy. So people don't have a lot of time that they can devote to being involved in an evaluation, especially if they're not sure that it's giving them anything that they really want. There are long distances involved in development work. If you're working outside of urban centers, it's hard to get there, it's hard to get back. It takes time to do the travel. Distance is a problem in itself. Communication is difficult. So if you would like to involve the participants and they're far away and there aren't good communication structures, that's going to be a problem. And if language is an issue, then that becomes even more common. So all of these things contribute to what is the most sort of general problem. Money is finite. We cannot spend infinitely even to do a participatory evaluation. And all of these other activities require resources of one sort or another. So these kind of constraints create dilemmas. Okay, so with those dilemmas in mind, and I'll remind you about them a little bit towards the end. How am I doing for time?
You've got about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, so we're going to start to list through this. So I want to show you a little bit of the project that we evaluated, and then we'll work through the steps that we went through with the evaluation. So the director of the project, Gard Otis, is here. He's going to be featured in the video, so you'll hear Gard speaking, and he can answer questions later as well. This was produced by Joey Savage, who works for Spark. So this is a university product, University of Guelph product. And if all goes well and the sound does not mess us up.
I've had the opportunity to work with honeybees in about 35 different countries around the world. And as I visit places and I experience their beekeeping and I view what they're doing, I've gradually learned a lot of things that work and a lot of things that don't work. In 1995, I first met some bee researchers from Vietnam, and it became apparent that their level of expertise was quite far above that of most of the other countries in Southeast Asia. And later, when I came to a conference in Vietnam, I met with them and we decided we would try to develop a project together. There were several possible places we could have initiated our training activities with beekeeping. Key among all of them was that there would be a high level of poverty in the area, because beekeeping can be an excellent sideline activity for income generation. It has sort of like the perfect storm of characteristics. It builds here in Vietnam on a tradition of people keeping bees. Honey has a very high value. They can sell the product very easily. The bees are part of the natural environment. The bees that are here in this apiary are pollinating people's fruit trees, and 1 kilometer in all directions from here. Just the whole set of conditions here were extremely favorable for low-scale beekeeping that would be highly profitable. We're giving people the knowledge of the bees and the management of the bees that all fits together in a system that's integrated with the seasonality of when it rains and when it's cold and when the bees need to be fed and so forth. A big difference with this project from many others is that instead of just learning a set of techniques that they apply without really understanding when or why they should do the things they do, these trainees have actually put it all together into a system that they're actually able to innovate and create novel solutions to problems that we never would have thought were possible. So we've actually had several people innovate with hive designs or innovate with management systems, for example, to overcome diseases that I've never heard of anybody doing before, and yet they've tried them and they're working, and the ideas behind them are now spreading to their neighbors and others in their beekeeping club. Most people, when they think of beekeeping, they think of honey, and that's really the way we designed the project, thinking about producing, getting people involved in beekeeping so they can produce honey or more honey than before, and to sell that for a profit. But what's emerged is that probably 80% of the beekeepers also sell bee colonies. In addition to that, quite a few of them have learned how to raise queens very, very successfully. So they raise queens and they actually sell them to other people, or within their own commune and with their friends, they may give them away to other people. Queen rearing is a high-end activity that's technically quite complex. And yet, within each group of 30 people we've trained, we probably have 5 or 6 who are now proficient at raising queens. And we even have now some people who don't even want to produce honey. They just want to produce bees for sale, much like you would find with queen and bee producers in the southern United States, for example. Within the small area, they now have essentially all of the components of a complete industry that I think will allow them to be sustainable with this activity far into the future.
Okay, so that gives you a very brief picture of what the project looks like. I will give you a little more background information that wasn't included in the video. Where did the project take place? Where was the beekeeping training going on? It was in Ha Tinh province, which is that orangey colored one there on this map of Vietnam. It's about a 6 to 8 hour drive from Hanoi down to Ha Tinh, so that's kind of the commute that one had to make. It takes about a day to get down and a day to get back from Hanoi. And in the province of Ha Tinh, the beekeeping, there were 6 communes involved in the project. 4 of those communes are here in Hong Son. Son means mountain, so these are kind of mountain communes. There are more rural communes. The Lao border is here on the left, so this is the mountain range that basically divides Laos and Vietnam. So this district is right on that border, and the other district is right beside it, Phu Quang. 4 communes in Hong Son, 2 communes in Vu Quang. This is where the training took place. This is where the beekeepers are. So this is where the bulk of the evaluation also took place. So who was involved with the project? Because remember, when we're thinking about participatory evaluation, everyone is supposed to be engaged. So who was involved in this project? Well, CETA was the donor, and they gave their money to the AUCC, Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, and the AUCC gave the money to the University of Guelph, and the University of Guelph distributed that money in various ways to the Bee Research and Development Center in Hanoi. So the Bee Research and Development Center, from now on to be called BRDC. Got me into the acronym, sorry, I'm just there. BRDC was kind of the local implementer, but the University of Guelph was part of the implementation. So the project is a University of Guelph BRDC project. BRDC worked with the 6 communes, Son Tay, Son Diem, Son Mai, and Son Trong in Hong Son, and Du Cling and Son To in Vu Quang. In each commune, roughly 30 beekeepers were trained. So altogether, there was about 120 beekeepers, no, 180? 190, a few others slipped in. So about 190 beekeepers altogether. But there were some other peripheral recipients who I'm not going to talk about too much, but just for completeness. There was some outreach to university extension people, Ministry of Agriculture and Development extension people in Vietnam, and also others in Asia that were doing beekeeping work. So there was some training with those groups as well, but the bulk of it was BRDC in relationship to the commons. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the time. So what were the goals of the project? I forgot to animate this slide. The first one was to enhance the extension capacity in Vietnam in relation to participatory methodologies. So the project itself had a participatory orientation. It was intending to teach participatory methodologies. The second goal was to have beekeeping recognized as a poverty alleviation strategy. The value of that was to be demonstrated, and that was the goal under which all of the beekeeper training took place, which is mostly what we're going to talk about. More scientifically, to demonstrate the value of bees as pollinators and the possible production benefits of having higher populations of bees was the third goal. And the fourth goal was a gender goal to improve gender equity and appreciation of gender relations in Vietnam. So those were the big goals of the project. Now the logistics. We had two phases, well, really, I guess 4 phases as I lay it out here. First thing we had to do was think about how we were going to do this evaluation. GARD approached us last August, about a year ago, so we started to think about how this might happen. The most intense part of the design period came in January and early February of this year. And then in late February, Nonita and I went to Vietnam with GARD, and we visited all 6 communes. So we met with the commune leaders, we met with the beekeepers, we discussed the evaluation that we wanted to do, but this was a very short visit. During this visit, we asked them what kind of problems were they having. We just had a sort of general introduction to the issues of beekeeping. But we also asked them about the feasibility of doing interviews and so on when we came back later. So we asked the beekeepers, how many interviews is it feasible for us to do in 2 days? And they all agreed somewhere between 18 and 20. So we set that as the target for the interviews that we would do. Then we came back to Guelph for about a month, and we let things kind of roll on, and we thought a little more about issues with the evaluation. And then we went back again in early April. We spent 3 weeks on the communes, 3 days in each commune, plus some time in Hanoi. And during that time, we did focus groups and interviews and so on. So that took April and a little bit of May to do that. And then the write-up came after that in June and July. The first draft of the report is done, and we're still working on the second draft, so this is still in process. So what did we do during that time? Oh, sorry, before we get to what we did, the team. What was unusual about this and what made it, I think, more participatory, we can claim it was more participatory, is we didn't do that sort of yellow lined separation between the evaluation team and the project staff and the recipients. In fact, we, Nonita and I, as the external evaluators, we used the project team as our local evaluation team. So they did the logistics. They helped us move around, arrange meetings. They hired translators. So in effect, BRDC was both being evaluated and was part of the evaluation team. So for an accountability evaluation, this would be problematic. But in a participatory mode, we think this is more acceptable. The external team was Nonita and I, plus 2 master students. So it was 4 in the external team. And then the local team was GARD, 8 BRDC staff, 3 translators, 2 bus drivers who moved us back and forth, and a lot of people helping us get around the motorcycles. So the local team was quite big. There's one of the groups. There's more than one These people evolved over time and the group changed, but almost all the time we were in the field, we had about this many people working on the evaluation. So what did we do? What were the components? How did we collect the data? We had 6 focus groups with the beekeepers, 1 in each commune. That was a full day focus group. 192 quantitative surveys. This is filling in 10 pages of data. They all fill that in. We had 90 individual one-on-one interviews with beekeepers, and another 18 beekeepers we interviewed in groups because time got short at one point. We had group interviews with 37 commune extension agents who are responsible not just for beekeeping but for many other agricultural activities. We did some individual interviews with the district extension agents from Hong Kong and Wuhan. We did the individual interviews with BRDC staff, and we did a focus group with BRDC staff. So that altogether took about 28 days to do all of that activity. And two others in Hanoi that were available we were able to interview. So here's people filling in some of the quantitative surveys. Okay, I've got the 5-minute warning. What I'm going to buzz through now are just a few pictures that give you the scene. So this is one of the focus group meetings. This also was a focus group meeting. We had to do ethics approval for everybody. This is another commune focus group meeting. Some of the women filling in the questionnaire. One of the things that the project distributed were beekeeping manuals that had been produced by the project, so as part of the time we were there in the field, these were also distributed. So here's some of the beekeepers looking at the manuals that they just received. We also did a demonstration on the use of hydrometers to measure honey. So these were not evaluation activities, these were training activities. This was the project continuing even while we were doing the evaluation. And then we did the individual interviews. So we visited 90 beekeepers in their homes. So this is Nonita and the translator and 3 beekeepers. This is Guard, and I'm in there at the back, and the translator, and a couple of BRDC staff with 1 beekeeper who's sitting at the back. This gentleman is a great beekeeper. Another interview in the home. And of course there was some downtime as well, having refreshments. And just to demonstrate that I actually was there, one picture. Okay. So now, I've got only a few minutes left, so I'm going to zoom through this, probably faster than I should. I want you to start thinking about evaluating what we do in terms of its participatory quality. So remember some of the questions that I suggested to you before. Who designs? Who chooses criteria? Who collects data? Who provides the data? How is it going to be collected? How is it going to be analyzed? Does social learning take place? That's a question I just added in here. Does social learning take place? Because that's important. Who analyzes and writes up the report? And who receives the report? Those are all questions we ask about participatory evaluation. So let me tell you what happened in this one. Who designed the evaluation? Well, the initial survey of the documents, that was the external team. That was Melita and I and the students. Who designed the survey instrument? That was us as well as GARD. So the project director was part of that design process. Developing the interview questions, also the external team and project director. The scheduling of the initial meetings in the communes was us and BRDC staff. Who chose the criteria? Largely the criteria were decided by us, with some consultation with GARD. Who chose what data to collect? Some of that was determined by the project itself because there had been a baseline survey, so we wanted to replicate the baseline survey. So that was really the project team that made the decisions about that data, but we did add new data in, so the external evaluators also added new data in the second survey. In terms of interview questions, we and GARD designed those. Who provided the data? The beekeepers. But it was the project staff, the BRDC people, who worked with the beekeepers to fill in the questionnaires. We didn't have any direct engagement because of the language problem. Who did the interviews? We did the interviews with the help of the RDC staff and the translators. So everyone who was involved with the project provided data, but of course that would happen in accountability evaluation as well. Who chose how it would be collected? Well, largely the project determined that because of the baseline survey that had been done. Who decided how the interviews would be conducted? To a large extent, it was the external team with GARD, although the organization of the interviews, the logistics, was done by the project staff. So far, we're not hearing a lot about the beekeepers in their engagement with the project. Who collected the data? The RDC staff did, and we did, with translators. Was there social learning? This is a key question. Well, I think what we tried to do was bring all the actors together when we had the focus groups in the 6 communes. So we had some of the project team, some of the BRDC staff, we had the beekeepers from the commune, we had the extension agents from the commune, sometimes in a few places we even had some of the senior officials from the commune, and in a couple of cases we had the district extension agents, all in the room at the same time. And so that was the moment at which we tried to establish a social learning agenda. And the way we did that was we had as a topic of discussion for the focus group the future of beekeeping in the commune. So the intention was to have a discussion with everybody about what was working, what was not working, what needed to change, what could be done to solve any existing problems. And there were problems, and some resolutions to those problems were worked out. In particular, BRDC took on some continuing responsibility for helping to organize materials for the beekeepers. That was the most important outcome of the process. All of the beekeepers said they wanted to continue beekeeping, so we felt sustainability was quite strongly represented. But the important thing here is this notion that we were trying to create a context for social learning for the project. That was the intent of that effort. How did we, one of the criteria was relevance. How did we determine that? We didn't do that in the focus group, we did that in individual interviews. Beekeepers liked the training, basically said they would have not wanted anything else instead of beekeeping. A few said maybe we'd like some additional training, but everyone was very happy with the training. Who analyzed the data and wrote the report? The external team did. No need to know. Who will receive the report? I'm not sure. The report is written in English at this stage, still being finalized. So no problem, AUCC, CETA, BRDC, because some of the BRDC staff reads English, they can get access. But if we're going to get this out to the extension agents and the beekeepers, it needs to be translated. But now the project is over, because the evaluation was done at the end of the project. So it's a bit of a question. I put a question mark. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Hopefully, BRDC will have the resources to do some summary translation, but that's a little bit hard. So, to bring this to a close, remember again the dilemmas: diverse knowledge, limited time, long distances, weak communication, and finite money. And think about all of the places where participants could be involved in the evaluation. Sorry? Oh, I already went through that list earlier. So that list of who collects the data and so on. Try to bear that in mind. We have these dilemmas, and the question that I leave you with is how participatory will it be? I'm not giving you an opinion. I have an opinion, but I'm not giving that to you. I'd like us to discuss that. Okay? So the question is, what do you think? How participatory is this? Could we have done better? Should we have done better? That's it. I'm done. So I would seriously like us to explore participation and the dilemmas that it sort of throws up, but of course, any other questions, the floor is open. Only Barry doesn't need those.
Maybe just more of a technical question. If the money originates with CETA as it did, and maybe this is also for GARD as stipulation that the evaluation needed to be done by an external team. Because to get the discussion going, it seems that you're both at the university, well, more like an internal evaluation than an external evaluation. The optics.
I'll just come up here to back up John. So I'm Gar. And this was interesting. The project had funding in it for a midterm evaluation with the idea that about halfway along, you would get somebody external to come in, see what was working, what wasn't working, and shift activities so that you could change things before it all screeched to a halt. They clawed that money back. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but government was under a budget shortfall, I guess. So they clawed back the only evaluation that was in our project. So it was actually me who freed up money in the project to say, we need to do this because we have to find out, we have to get some real numbers and data and qualitative assessments about what happened. Because otherwise, what do we have? We just have a whole bunch of people think we did an okay job, and that's not it.
So it was not only an effort to be participatory, it was also a voluntary evaluation.
It cost a lot of money, actually. It cost more than most of the other things we did in the project.
It probably cost about a third of what a formal external evaluation would have cost. It's about half time.
You're that cheap?
Huh?
You're that cheap?
I'm that cheap, yeah. But we're cheaper than most.
I was like,
We're very
What would be the value foregone if you aren't able to translate it and get it back in the hands of the beekeepers and those that participate? Is there learning there that gets lost?
I suspect that not that much would be lost. The beekeepers all formed beekeeping clubs, so they all meet regularly and exchange experiences. They have quite good contacts with BRDC in Hanoi. They're in telephone contact with them. I think BRDC really internalized a lot of the learnings of the participatory approach. They really convinced themselves that this was a better way to go. And I am hoping that we, as part of the series, at some point have the presentation of the project, because there's a ton of interesting techniques that were used in this project, which I haven't spoken to. I haven't really talked about the results in terms quantitatively. But I think BRDC really learned a lot. And so what we would tell them would not be that much more. But I think there are some observations in our thinking about it, which might help them, especially in relationship to other branches of the government.
can I just add? We did promise every one of the communes that they would get a summary of the numbers for their commune at least. And I kind of would like, they're so close together, yet they're operating completely independently with almost no talking between each other. And if we can do anything through this process to enhance the communication within these 6 different communes so that they collaborate more, that would be a positive thing.
I think you forgot to mention, I think, an important step. You did ask, and we spent a lot of time on this. You asked the beekeepers, how many hours in a day will they work with us? What time can we start? What time should we stop? What days of the week are off limits? And that, I think, was very important for them. They
Yeah, that
once
was-
said, you can't come at this time, you can take 6 o'clock, you know.
During the first visit, which was in February, we actually talked about those scheduling issues with them. That's how we determined how many interviews we would do. How much time do we have? How much time can we be in the communes? How much time are they willing to give us? And when we were there for the second visit, actually collecting the data, they organized themselves to find the 20 to be interviewed. So there was self-selection amongst the beekeepers. It wasn't a randomized process. So that was a sociological weakness, I suppose. But that was the context. We couldn't do more than 20. Some people were not available, so they kind of selected themselves, and then we went to interview.
I'm more familiar with the accountability type of evaluation so far, so thank you for sharing a bunch of insights about the participatory approach. You told us who was in charge of the different parts of the evaluation. I'm interested in how you decided in particular on things like which evaluation criteria
relevance.
and relevance. Those are part of like an OECD gap type of
Yep.
literature that deals with standards of evaluation. But there's others, harmonization, alignment, targeting coverage, things like that, gender impacts and things. How did you, as the external evaluation team, decide that was that process?
Well, we didn't, I mean, you're listing some other criteria that could have been embedded. Gender was embedded as a goal, so that was assessed and collect everything was gender disaggregated. That we collected. But the other criteria on your list, basically, I didn't think of those. They weren't in my mind. Nobita wants
You
to
did,
say
but
something.
I did.
Here we go.
There was
Here
a
we
second
go.
part. The survey, we added a second part of the survey. And we asked, did you agree on anything when you adopted beekeeping? What kind of communication channels was used? Did it change anything in the household? Gender relations, do you feel more equal? Right? And so they actually dug deeper into the decision process. That was his concern. But
I should clarify that the goals and the purposes and the outcomes of the project were very complicated. If you go through the report, there's layers and layers, and the survey instruments that we used were quite complex. So when I'm talking about the criteria, it's really the most general criteria that we're using to kind of scope the evaluation. There was a lot of details, as Anita said, even in the part that wasn't about dissemination, there was a lot of information. Because we had different survey instruments for every participant. Beekeepers, all the BRDC staff, different types of extension agents, they all had different surveys, or not surveys, questionnaires. So when we sat and interviewed them.
And you came up with them from scratch?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, that January was busy.
That's it.
And then after we came back at the end of February, it was sort of had to retool everything and think it through again before we finalized. And then it all had to be translated into the English. So the translators would have a chance to read the questions before they had to translate.
Thank you for this. I recognize that you're giving us a meta perspective, but you are also now an expert on the project. So where can you tell us a little bit about what the outcomes were? What were the changes in household relationships, gender, income? It's a fascinating project.
Go for it, John. Go for it. In a nutshell.
Well, okay. The reason I'm concerned is because I would really like us to have a session on the project. And I'm afraid you won't be interested if you know too much about the results. But the income results were quite impressive. Beekeepers in general raised their income about 25% through beekeeping. And this was achieved basically, in their own words, without any additional work. So by and large, they reported to us that they didn't have to give up anything else, any other productive activities, in order to take on beekeeping. So economically, it had that very positive benefit. And as Gard said in the video, there were some beekeepers who've really developed skills now that they can commercialize beekeeping quite effectively. So some have quite high incomes. The average additional income was in the range of $250 to $300 Canadian.
It was about 300, and at the start point when we evaluated them, they were from different bee-related activities. They were getting about $35 per person on average. So it went up about $265, and these are families that may have an annual income of $1,500 for the whole family. So it's really huge.
And then interesting sort of family dynamics. Several older couples were able to say they could continue working when they weren't really able to be in the field anymore. And that was very impressive to me. And several who were ill were able to continue working. Sorry, I've been throaty here. Were able to continue working despite the fact that they weren't able to go in the field sometimes because of their illness. So this was very impressive. The fact that this was not just a diversification, but it was actually reaching out to those who were in the process of becoming marginalized. In terms of family dynamics, when we asked about gender issues, by and large, Anita, you can correct me on this, but by and large, I would say people said, no, we didn't learn a lot about gender from this. I mean, we're already very egalitarian. I think that was the expression that came from both males and females. Not everyone, but most, I would say. Another interesting outcome was kind of the emergence of social capital amongst the beekeepers. So they were helping each other, and they were recognizing the value of that. And younger people were helping older people. So that notion of sort of them having an identity within the commune was a very impressive element. Yeah, so maybe that's...
One other piece, honey is a really highly valued product, and it's a really highly valued gift. And so everybody who produces honey gives honey. And that's part of the social capital. The average value of the honey given away, obviously some people are higher and lower, but was worth about $72 per person. So had they sold it, that's what they would have made, but they chose to give it.
Just a quick correction, more recent figure. The average household income for inhabiting is only $599 for the year 2010. So in fact, the $200 coming from beekeeping was 35% of the average household income. So it is quite significant. It's not even close. And I just want to give a comment about the wind. This is really fascinating. Here's what a woman, you ask her, has it changed anything? Here's a woman who says, before the project, I only did housework. But now I keep peace and earn money, so my husband respects me more. I feel more equal to my husband since the project. Then another one, before the project, my husband made all decisions. Now he consults with me, and we make decisions together. And that's 37% of the 190% that it did change the family relations. And even the men agree. In fact, one man said, we bought a cooker, gas cooker, because my wife said it saves her time. So that was really effective.
And then we asked if they bought that sort of equipment from money earned from beekeeping. In some cases, they say.
We do one more short question, that'll be it then.
What would you do differently if you were to do this evaluation over again?
I would certainly like to have spent more time in the commune. I would have probably liked to have a few days to talk about solving the problems. The main problem that they identified in the modern beehives, the ones you see, the box hives, you need a sheet of foundation, wax foundation, in order to get the bees to build their combs in a convenient way to make them removable. And that foundation during the project was brought from Hanoi by BRDC. So the biggest discussion we had going on in each of the focus groups was how could we get foundation? What would be the strategy? And in the end, BRDC kind of conceded that it would continue to help them by finding a way to arrange for the shipment of foundation to the communes. I think if we had been there longer, and I don't know what happened with the machine, maybe we can speak about that, but I think if we had been there a bit longer, we could have moved that conversation to the point where they would have started to supply themselves and sort of break that dependency on BRDC. We didn't achieve that, and I think that would have been, with more time, we might have been able to get there.
And so to add the final comment, that foundation machine, it costs a couple $1,000s to get a mill that basically you roll the sheet through, and it gives it that little six-sided selling print that you see in those rolled candles sometimes. And so we had enough money at the end of the project that we bought one of those mills. It sits at the district extension office, the technology center. We took two of the beekeepers who were higher level of expertise and sent a person from Hanoi who does foundation making down to train them in how to do it for 5 days. So they have the expertise. I don't think it's going to work myself because I've seen these things before and they damage them and they don't use them well. But I could be proven wrong. They said they wanted it, so I said participatory development, that's what we're going to give them.
So this happened after we finished the evaluations. We finished up in early May, and this was something that happened June, July. So the project was still moving even as we were trying to evaluate. But I think that was a good move. It's definitely something that worked.
Thank you all for your questions. One of the things I do in my job is a lot of fundraising, and what we take for most of our meetings is a jar of honey. And it's a fantastic currency. It's University of Guelph honey. And I just realized I have no idea where it comes from in the bowels of this institution. his presentation. Personally, for me, it's always a pleasure to get out of my administrative head and engage in a scholarly, intellectual conversation, so I appreciate that very much. I also want to thank you for reporting your work in collaboration with Gard and Anita on this evaluation project. Fascinating project, and obviously lots of good work that went into this. So thank you for a stimulating presentation. Please join me in thanking John for the work that he did today. I understand that there are refreshments that are here, so please stay and linger a little bit, and you can ask John some more questions. Gard and Anita, if they're able to stay, and enjoy